Kidding. It is great to be together. Today is Palm Sunday, if you didn't know. I mean, it seems like a number of people have said, when's Easter again? Is today something special? So I'm like, it's interesting because the denominational world has a liturgical calendar, and it's a very big deal. I mean, this week is a very big deal. My dad was a choir director, and then we jump right to the scripture. I love it. Just get right to the Word of God. Everybody now knows we'll be in Matthew 21. It's a secret, but now you know. No, I'm kidding. It's not a secret. It's the Bible. But this was a very big week. In fact, so much so that it was kind of stressful because, there were extra services and extra music. And my dad always would direct a passion play for Good Friday. And I mean, it was a big week. And, my dad didn't handle pressure well. So, we didn't handle it. It was like, just duck and cover, man. It's Easter week. But it kind of put a little extra pressure on putting the sermon together today. There's always not, it's not pressure's maybe not the right word, but responsibility, right? You're speaking to the people and you want to handle God's word correctly and all that stuff. But I thought, man, this is extra important because we're kicking off Holy Week. We're kicking off the week leading up to Easter. Got to do a good job, right? So I tried to put all the preparation together, tried to get a good night's sleep. And, our dogs are great. We've been talking a lot to the Catches because for those of you that don't know Tom and Jody, they just got a new dog. It's a little sausage dog named Gnocchi. So I don't know, that's kind of creepy but weird, but it's good. And now I'm hungry. But their dog doesn't sleep because it's a puppy, right? So they've been, dealing with all of that. And we're trying not to rub it in, but our dogs do great, man. They go in their little crates at night. They sleep. They've been crate trained since they were puppies. They sleep like last night, of course, because it was a big deal service. This is an important sermon. The dogs wake up in the middle of, well, not in the middle of the night, but it's like 4:30, right? The dogs, and they're howling in their little crates, which they never do. So I get up and I'm going to go let the dogs out because they don't normally do that. So I'm like, something's wrong. And the first thing I think is, well, there's somebody in my house or in my backyard. And Julie confided in me later. I didn't know this at the time. She thought the same thing because she heard them. And she goes, oh, good, Aaron's getting them. And then she goes, we really ought to keep a baseball bat by the bed just in case somebody broke in. This is exactly what happened. She told me, she goes, yeah, I had the thought that we should have a baseball bat handy just in case you get attacked, and then I fell right back asleep. Luckily, there were no people. I don't know, it was an animal or something in our backyard. Our dogs took care of business. They did not bring any, carcasses into the house, which is encouraging. But they scared off whatever was there. But this week, as I said, it was a big deal when I was a kid. I remember we would go to church on Sundays and we'd get on the Palm Sunday, and we'd get little palm leaves, yes. Right? And my dad had this cool thing. He knew how to fold them into a cross. I thought that was only my dad, and then I looked on the bulletin board in the hallway, and apparently everyone knows how to do it but me. But anyway, he used to fold it in. But it was all these memories, right? All these things tied to it. My daughter went to the Griffith Christian Church today, and they gave out palm leaves, and she sent a photo saying, Dad, look, they gave out palm leaves. And I sent her a note saying, we used to have sword fights in the parking lot with those when I was a kid, Well, that's what we did, right? Because we're boys, and they hand them out, and we're whacking each other with them. But what's my point in all of this? I do have a point. Yeah. Now, the point is that it was a big deal, and it built up into, obviously culminated. They had all these things during the week. It was the one time in the year where we actually had midweek because we would go to Thursday service. Right, because that's when Jesus was arrested. Then we go to Friday, Good Friday service, right? All the stuff, we did all these different things, and everyone had a different event, different special music. And as I said, Friday, there was a whole play. My dad was just busy, and we would do all these things. And it all culminated the next week with the coming of the Easter Bunny. Oh, no. Well, as a kid, right? So we did all this stuff and all this intensity, all this passion, and we, and then the Easter Bunny came, and we had chocolate and eggs. It's like, Jesus is risen. Hide the eggs. That's exactly what it was, And these are my strongest memories, but I want to be clear. Celebrating Easter next week is great. If you have small children, that's awesome. They should have these fond memories, but just keep Jesus real in all of it, okay? I don't know. I'm not saying my parents like ignored Jesus, but like all of a sudden it was about the Easter bunny and hiding eggs and eating chocolate, and I didn't understand the connection, right? But now we can help our kids to understand. But second only to Christmas, Easter was a big deal. It was something you anticipated. You were excited about it. You were going to get a basket. One year we actually got baby duck. My dad said they were chicks, so I thought they grew up to be chickens. They were ducklings, so they grew up to be ducks. But they all died except one. It was our family and another family, and ours all died, and then another family. But one grew and to an adult, and I remember we all got together, our families, and we went and we released it into the wild. Well, the pond, behind where all the ducks were. But it was kind of fun. It was something to learn. But just as we would anticipate this with excitement, you sat on the edges, you counted down the days, you had little tick-off calendars, all that kind of stuff. That's how the people of Israel at the time were feeling about the coming of their king. You say, well, what do you mean, Aaron? Well, if you read the Old Testament, there were a lot of prophecies about the coming of the king. And some of them were pretty specific about not the day and the hour, but a pretty, it was a broad timeline, but they knew they were living in that timeline. I mean, if you read Isaiah and you read Daniel and you read it on face value, you're like, okay, we are in the time that God's going to restore the kingdom to Israel. That's exactly what's going to happen. It's the fourth kingdom. We're in the middle of it. It's pretty obvious. Looking back, we had, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Greeks, and now the Romans are here. I mean, if you know this stuff, I'm not trying to get too much into history, but it was obvious that it was time for God to restore his king. So Jesus wasn't the only one who was like, people were getting excited about there maybe being a Messiah. If you read the history of this time period, there were lots of people that had come forward. There were lots of opportunities to maybe crown somebody king. So it wasn't that strange that this guy who stirred up everybody's hearts, who stirred up everybody's interests, they were interested in making him king over Israel. So they were anticipating the coming of the king, right? And this is what was happening. So remember, Jesus is going into Jerusalem. We are going to turn to Matthew 21. I know that we all got the hint already, so you might already be there. And, as referencing Bill's testimony during communion, you're very welcome to take notes. I heard somebody when he said they used to hand out the notes afterwards, and somebody went, oh, wow. I'm like, do I got to do everything for you? No, I'm kidding. But I do encourage people to take notes, because then you can go back and reference some of these things later, so how the Spirit moves in your heart, but the Scriptures to be like a Berean to make sure that what we're saying is true. These are all good things, right? So we're going to be in Matthew 21, but before we turn there, I want to point something out if you read the Gospels. Most of us have read all, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four Gospels. And something that's really interesting, Jesus had approximately, most people believe, about a 3-year ministry. They base that on the number of Passovers that are referenced, but it seems like it was about, I think that's pretty much standard. People believe that it was about 3 years. And if you read the Gospels, anywhere from 25 to 40% of each of the Gospels is spent documenting his last week. So think about that for a minute. 3-year ministry, and if you read John, 40 to 45% of the entire book is focused on the final week. Matthew's about 25%, Luke's about 20%, Mark's about 25%. So you get a huge chunk of the focus is on the final week. But that's not shocking if you think about it. What does gospel mean? It means good news. What is the good news? Bill said it during his testimony. Jesus came to earth as a man. That's a big deal. That he suffered and died on the cross, and then 3 days later, he conquered death and rose from the dead. Now, I don't want to steal Braxton's thunder. That'll be next week's sermon. But that is the good news. That there is victory over death. So it's no surprise that a third of the book is focused on this final week. But I thought, well, as disciples, then we ought to align with that in our focus, right? We ought to realize this is a very important part of who we are and a very important part of our spiritual identity. And, there's no broader point to that other than that we can have a heightened focus. So let's read Matthew chapter 21 in verse 1. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you'll find a donkey tied there, with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away." This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. Say to daughter of Zion, your king comes to you gentle and riding on a donkey and on a colt, the foal of a donkey. The disciples went and did this just as Jesus had instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the ground, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the ground. The crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest of heavens. Then Jesus entered Jerusalem. The whole city was stirred and asked, who is this? And the crowd answered, this is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee. So this is why we call it Palm Sunday, right? If you read this account in the book of John, it actually says they cut palm branches. So we're going to go with the culmination of all the gospels. But so Jesus is out there. He's getting ready to go into Jerusalem. Now keep in mind, it's a very important week. It's the holiest holiday is coming up, the Passover. A very holy time for the Israelite people, right? As they remember being rescued from slavery in Egypt, they remember being pulled out of slavery and restored as a nation and established as a nation. That's all the things we're studying in Thread and other places. So we get this stuff, right? It all ties together. It's this Passover week coming in, and Jesus is coming in. And imagine being one of those two disciples. He says, guys, you're going to go into town. There's going to be a donkey in its foal, and you're going to grab him, and you're going to bring him to me. And if anybody stops you, just tell them the Lord needs them. You say, sounds simple enough. Hey, Braxton, somebody's Honda is out there. I need you to go grab it and steal. I need you to Grand Theft Auto, go take their and bring it to me. And by the way, if they stop you or the cops come, just tell them I need it. It sounds a little nuts, right? They weren't committing Grand Theft Donkey. I know God had set this up for them. God had set this up for them. God knew what he was doing, but God was fulfilling the amazing thing about when you read all the Gospels, particularly Matthew. His focus is on this fulfillment of all these old prophecies and this tying in of the history of God's people and the things that were said throughout the ages. It's faith building. He said, look, just like the prophet said, he's going to come in on a donkey, a foal of a donkey. He's going to come in. It's going to be amazing. And then they said, Hosanna, Hosanna. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna to the Son of David. These people were waiting for a king. They saw this guy coming in. It harkened them back to Zechariah, where he said in chapter 9, verse 9, he's going to come in on a donkey. They knew he was already famous. And there's all these things culminated, right? And here he comes, and they start saying Hosanna, which we think of as a religious phrase or something we sing in like songs. It just means save us. Save us, Son of David. And they very much thought they had a king coming to conquer. The king was coming to rally the people like the leaders of the Maccabees or like King David. He was going to rally the troops and defeat the Philistines, in this case, defeat the Romans and drive them out and once again establish Israel as a powerful, united, independent kingdom. That's what they thought. That was absolutely their expectation. People had an expectation of what the king would be, what he would act like, what he would look like, what he would be like. Well, maybe not what he would look like, but they had an expectation of this king. And immediately, Jesus challenges the premise of their expectation. He doesn't come in on some powerful white horse. He doesn't come in on a stallion. He doesn't come in with an army. He comes in with a handful of disciples who are healers and teachers, and he comes in with humility. He comes in on a donkey and says, God has sent me to you. But they didn't know what to think at this point. They didn't know what to make of this guy, this teacher, this hopeful Messiah in their minds. Now, so they start chanting, save us, Son of David. Hosanna, Hosanna, save us. And the interesting thing is, with the benefit of hindsight, we know that he did just that. He saved every single person there, and every person that ever lived, and every person that ever will live. He truly did respond to their plea, save us. He just saved them in a way that they didn't really understand. He saved them in a way that they didn't really comprehend. And you step back and you think, do I really like to admit that I have expectations of God? I have expectations of my King. We don't like to say that because we think it's prideful or presumptuous, and it is, but we still have them. So it's like we could either deny that we do, or we could be honest with ourselves and with God and say, hey, I have some expectations. Because one of the roots of conflict, one of the roots of pain, one of the roots of challenges is when there are unmet expectations. Now, that doesn't mean God is going to meet all your expectations. In fact, by definition, he didn't meet the expectations of the people. But they still had expectations. And if God is going to defy those expectations, we have to decide how we're going to respond. The Bible doesn't say that it's the same people. But just a week later, there's another crowd. And perhaps many of them are the same people. I have no idea. It's in the same town. But they're not saying, save us anymore. They're not saying, Hosanna anymore. They're saying, crucify him. That's what happened. That's what happened. And that's how we can respond when we face the disappointment of unmet expectations, if we don't understand that we have expectations. But first, this crowd is pretty amazing. They're saying, save us, save us. They're throwing their cloaks on the ground. They're cutting down the palm branches, and they're throwing those on the ground. I mean, they're just like making it this holy place. We don't even want him touching dirt. Right? It's just bowing before him. But the thing is that's interesting is if you examine this crowd, at this moment, they're excited to walk with Jesus. They're excited. They can't believe how awesome this is. And then down the road, they face this disappointment of unmet expectations or differing expectations, or realizing that the reality was there's a cognitive dissonance between reality and their expectations. And instead of embracing that, they reject Jesus. But I want to talk about both things because I think sometimes I asked myself this question. I was putting the lesson together. I'm like, man, am I excited to walk with Jesus? Because, of course, you want the answer to always be yes. Oh, yes, I am. That's why I'm up here. I'm qualified. And if I'm honest, I had to say sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm not.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like it's a duty. Sometimes I just feel disconnected. Sometimes I just feel really selfish. Or I just want what I want. And I don't feel excited about walking with Jesus. And so I got to figure out, what do I do in those moments? Because I think my natural sinful tendency, and I'll call it a sin, is to fake it till I make it. Right? Like, well, I don't really feel it, but I'm just going to go act it, and hopefully something will happen, Now, I do think there is when you have the right attitude and heart about that, and you're honest and you're dealing with stuff, there is a truism that you can act your way into a better way of feeling, right? So I'm not saying that we should just go by our feelings and not do what God has called us to do. But I think it's important to be real. It's important to be real and to be honest about what we're thinking and what we're feeling. And if you're not feeling excited about a relationship with God and you're not feeling excited about walking with Jesus, I'm going to say this in a way that I hope you understand. That's okay. That's normal. That happens to everybody. The real question is, do you want to be excited about it?
Yeah.
Do you want, or have you tasted that excitement in the past, and do you want to get that back? I mean, those are different issues than, well, I'm not excited. And there are people out there that aren't excited about God and maybe never will be because they have just decided they're going to put up a barrier. There is no God or what have you. But I don't think you'd be here if that were you, right? Well, unless somebody made you come, or you're, I don't know, or you're being paid. But I'm kidding. That was a joke. No, I mean, unless you wouldn't give up your time and come on a Sunday if you didn't have this desire. So you say, okay, how do I fuel that desire? Getting real, getting honest, and then having enough faith. You don't have to have faith that God is going to give you some crazy epiphany. You just have to have enough faith to believe the scripture is true that says, where God says, if you seek me, you'll find me if you seek me with all your heart.
Right.
Say, well, I can do that. I can have wholehearted devotion. I can go after it with all my heart. The challenge is when we're feeling these things, when we're not feeling, as engaged or as excited, we start to withdraw and we stop seeking. It's like a cycle, and it just cycles, and then we spiral. Am I the only one who's ever experienced this? Please tell me no. You guys understand what I'm saying? So it's breaking that cycle and finding a healthy way forward. And the crowd was excited to walk with Jesus until they weren't. And what changed? Well, we talked about the potential of unmet expectations. There was also a lot of pressure from the religious leaders. If you read through the whole Gospels, it says, they were stirred up. The religious leaders stirred them up. And it's interesting because not only does a huge volume of the gospel message or the books encompass this last week, some of the most challenging things Jesus ever said, he said in this week between his triumphant entry and his crucifixion. This is where 2 of the 3 Gospels document him turning over the tables, the famous table turning. John has it earlier, but either he did it more than once, which is possible, or what I personally think, but I don't know there's a right answer. I'm just telling you what I think. John doesn't seem to have everything in chronological order anyway. John seems to be writing from Patmos about, here are my memories of Jesus, and he gets on a roll, and then, as he gets more chronological, the further along in the book he goes. Whereas Matthew, Mark, and Luke seem to be more committed to chronology. But it doesn't even matter. He could have done it more than once. It could be that it wasn't chronological. But 2 of the 3 document this is where he, made the whip and turned over the tables, called them a den of robbers. John documents this is where he had the whole, you're sons of the devil. All these intense things. Matthew where he says, your whitewashed tombs. All this stuff, Matthew 23. All this stuff. Some of the heaviest, dutiest, most intense sermons Jesus ever preached seem to be in this week. And so potentially they were turning against these hard teachings, or a lot of it was specifically targeted at the religious leaders and hypocrisy, and so they stirred people against him. But in one week, when they think he's going to be king, the crowds are chanting Hosanna, and a week later, the crowds are chanting crucify him. There's influence there. People are influenced by that leadership, but also by the crowd itself. And I've been thinking about this. I'm like, how much am I influenced by the crowd? Right? I don't mean a literal mob, although, if you've ever gone to a sporting event, it gets pretty exciting. You start cheering, you even cheer for a great play if it's by the other team because it's just everybody's cheering and you're like, wow, I'm all in now, But the crowd that we face sometimes is other sources, right? We have media, social media, actual media, right? Just social trends. There are things that we believed firmly 20, 30 years ago that we've really softened our convictions about. Yeah. And I'm not here to say that we ought to be these people online that are causing fights or that are arguing with people. There's no sense in that. But I sometimes feel like I can't even share my opinion because of the social pressure and being labeled something. And there's a bullying aspect to this social dynamic. Yeah. And that's a reality we have to face. But what we also have to ask ourselves is, does it cause me to change my opinion or my perspective? Did I go from saying Hosanna to crucify him because, Facebook said XYZ? Because most everyone thinks, most people don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God and died on the cross for you. I mean, it's a lot of people do, but most don't. Jesus himself said the way is narrow. Only a few are going to find it. So we're walking on a narrow road, and the people on the wide road are yelling at us to cut a path and come on over. Are we going to cut a path and come on over, or are we going to stay on the narrow road? That's really the challenge that we have to face. And that's what we see in this dynamic during this week, this powerful week where the king who is a humble king, he comes in as a different king. He comes in with a different mindset as a king. shifts his focus and shifts his perspective. And again, I'm not talking about us becoming somehow, an army of belligerent, opposing views online or arguing with people. I don't encourage that at all. But I think that we have to be able to stand up for what we believe, and you have to be willing to say, there are moral truths, there are moral absolutes, regardless of what society says. And they're really true, even if I don't like it. Yeah. Even if I don't agree with it or want it to be that way. There are moral realities from the scriptures that we just have to say, well, that's Bible. That's what God says. So either God is God or he's not. Either God is God or he's not. And if God is God, then I have got to have the courage of my convictions to not be moved by the crowd. So we've talked about the expectations of the people and how they were influenced and how they shifted. But, on this entrance as king, Jesus had expectations too. When he was getting ready to walk into Jerusalem, when he was getting ready, the Bible says he resolutely set out. He's going in. But you know what he expected? He expected to be abused. He expected to be arrested. He expected to be falsely accused. He expected to be ultimately tortured and killed. He understood that this would lead to his brutal execution. And yet, head held high, he still said to the disciples, go boost that donkey and bring it to me, and we're going. But the reality is we sort of get a glimpse here into how Jesus faced down anxiety. You say, Aaron, how dare you say Jesus was anxious? Why do we know he was anxious? Ultimately, it culminated in the garden where he said, God, isn't there some other way? I've been tough all week, man. I've been going toe to toe. I've stood up and done what you asked, even in the hard times, but come on, God. And God said, not my will. And Jesus said, not my will, but yours be done, because he knew that God's way was our only hope. So he's facing this anxiety, and if you read through this week into how he did it, see, what happens when we get anxious or insecure or challenged is we generally withdraw even more.
Yes. Yep.
If you have social anxiety especially, right? And it's okay. I mean, these things happen to lots of folks. But here's the toxic nature of it. You're feeling these things, and so you withdraw more, and you get even more into yourself and more focus on you, which leads to what? More anxiety. The more I look at me, the more I see my flaws, because I got tons of them. And I'm anxious because I already see them, and now I'm looking, I see even more. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do with all this stuff? And Jesus maybe wasn't flaws, but he was seeing what was going to happen, and there's anxiety. He's like, it would be tempting to sit and focus, oh my gosh, here's what they're going to do. Every time you hear a door shut, you think of a nail hammer pounding. But Jesus somehow overcame this anxiety, and we get a little insight as we study out this week. What did he do? In the midst of all this pressure to focus inward, he focused outward. Yeah. He spent this week so much more than any other period of time in his ministry focused on helping the disciples, the Last Supper, preaching in public. I mean, he just got out of himself. Because what is he anxious about? He's anxious about all the pain. He's anxious about all the challenges, but he's also anxious about these disciples. He's like, man, I'm putting all this in their hands. What if they drop the ball? What if they totally fail? Guys, go get me a donkey. Let's see if you can even handle that, right? And so he says, okay, I'm going to invest, and I'm going to get out of myself, and I'm going to focus. Because Jesus was a king. He was a king unlike any other king in our lifetimes. It's really interesting. There's a famous painting. I think I have a copy here in the presentation. It's called Checkmate. It's a famous painting by Friedrich Moritz August, and then the last name's R-E-T-Z-S-C-H. Who knows German? How do you say R-E-T-S-Z-C-H? Reach. We'll say that. This is a guy, a famous artist. This painting used to hang in the Louvre in 1999. It was taken on by a private collector. Most art historians believe this is Satan playing a desperate man in a game of chess, and the title of the painting is Checkmate. So this is apocryphal, I'm sure, but it's a story that's made the rounds. You can read it. You can actually Google it, you know. There was a tour. You can see the angel looking sort of like, oh, you poor thing. Right? And there is a story that there was a tour of the Louvre, and the docent was taking everyone around and explaining all the paintings, and showed them Checkmate, and moved on to the next painting, and moved on to the next. Next thing she knows, she realizes she's missing one of her tour participants. She goes back. Turns out the guy's a chess grandmaster. So he gets really enthralled with this. He's just staring at the painting. And she thinks, well, it has to do with chess. She doesn't know he's a grandmaster, but she's like, sir, we got to keep this thing moving. He goes, you do realize that this painting is misnamed. This painting should not be called Checkmate. He goes, well, that's what the artist called it. I'm sorry, I don't know what to do. She says, well, what do you mean? He said, no, look. Look carefully. He said, you're not in checkmate because the king has one more move. The king's still got to move. And you know, the answer to this and the reality of this and the power of this is even when our life feels desperate, even when you feel like there's nothing, there's nowhere to turn, I got nowhere to go, the king still has one more move. The king still has one more move in your life. And that's what Jesus showed on the cross. Everybody thought he was cornered. Everybody thought, in fact, I really believe this is an allegory because he looks like he's boxed in. He looks like it's over. They called it checkmate. But the king still had one more move. And I'm excited because next week, Braxton's going to teach us all about the king's next move. Thank you.